Walton grew up in Larchmont, New York, a suburb outside of New York City. His parents were from the South, where hunting and fishing were part of the lifestyle. But he also made trips into the city to get a dose of culture and visit museums. He was especially drawn to the American Museum of Natural History. In particular, the dioramas that portrayed life-size taxidermied animals in their natural habitat. These late 19th, early 20th century staged recreations dramatically presented the animals behind glass partitions. They were dark and dimly lit, always smelled a little bit musty. And to this day, Walton still makes research trips to there to take notes and to make initial drawings. As a child, Walton began to copy bird drawings from the books of naturalist John James Audubon.
Walton was never a child.
Yeah.
And to make sketches of animals in battle and conflict. It was clear from an early age that he had a gift for drawing and painting. Walton went on to attend the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design as a film major, where his interest in storytelling and narrative structure developed. The transition from his awareness of 19th century depictions of extinct specimens to these hyper-realistic, large-scale watercolors are just some of the ideas that we'll be able to cover this evening. And Irving Blum, as co-director of the infamous Ferris Gallery, Irving Blum developed the careers of important Los Angeles artists such as Ed Ruscha, Ed Moses, Larry Bell, and Bob Irwin. But he also brought in New York artists, Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, Frank Stella, and Ellsworth Kelly, to exhibit their works alongside their LA counterparts. This exchange between East and West Coast artists was intrinsic to the development of a thriving LA art scene, paving the way for stalwarts such as Larry Gagosian, and providing the foundation for the vibrant international art scene that we see in Los Angeles today. And Irving and Walton have known each other since the 1990s, when Walton was just starting out. And so, Irving, maybe you can start off. You really had an instinct for Walton's work before almost anybody did.
Yeah.
And how did you first become aware of Walton's work?
It's rather an interesting story. Oddly, I feel as if I'm going to be eaten. Having opened the gallery, the Ferris Gallery, I had a real problem, and my problem then was the fact that I had very little money, and I couldn't get back to New York often enough, maybe once a year maximum. And so I hit on a plan. I had 2 or 3 friends that I chose very carefully, that I knew had visited galleries throughout the year. And at the end of the year, each one would send me a list, and I would compare these lists. The 3 people I picked were Henry Geldzahler, before he became Henry Geldzahler. Dick Bellamy had a gallery called the Green Gallery, which I thought was a remarkable gallery. And Bill Seitz, who was a curator at the Museum of Modern Art, and who I got to know. Bill taught at Princeton, and he was the one who gave me Frank Stella early. He thought he was an extraordinary student. He thought he was somebody I should be aware of, and the rest is the rest. In any case, I kept doing that. Even when I left the gallery, I kept referring to certain people and trying to determine who it was they were focused on and who it was they were looking at. There was a guy called Bill Arning, particularly. He ran the nonprofit gallery called White Columns. Many of you may have heard of it. And Arning said to me, a guy called Walton Ford, and he's somebody you should go and visit. And I wrote the name down. And then a week later, or 2 weeks later, I bumped into a friend of mine called David Herbert, who worked for Betty Parsons, as well as Janice later. And we were chatting about one thing or another, and David said to me, interesting artist called Walton Ford. Well, I knew the name, having heard it a week earlier. I called Walton and arranged to visit. My wife and I went to his studio on the Lower East Side. I remember I had to climb several flights to get to where Walton was.
Four loft
flights.
Chambers Street, actually.
Chambers Street.
That's where it was.
I remember, but vaguely.
There's a lot of artists.
Yeah. And Walton showed me what he was doing, and I thought they were unique and engaging. And I said, after a while, I said, "You don't seem very happy to me, Walton."
Well, I was poor. I was hungry.
Walton was poor.
Struggling artist.
I said, a special problem? Or no? He said, yeah. He said, there is a special problem. I said, what is it? He said, well, my wife, Julie, I recollect, got some kind of small grant to go to India. I'm going as well. There's not enough money involved. A collector I know promised me $1,000 a month. We're going for a year. And he just called and said, it's not going to be possible. I can't give you the money I promised you. And so I looked at Walton, looked at my wife, and said, Walton, I think I can do that.
Yeah.
I think I can help you. And I was able to give him that sum, $12,000, for his activity in India over a year. And as a payment back to me, Walton sent me every month a watercolor. I put together a dozen of them that he sent as payment for the loan I had made to him.
Can't do that anymore.
Can't make
anymore. That deal with me right now. Nope. Sorry.
No, they're more valuable.
Even Irving can't make that deal.
They're more valuable today.
Well, it's almost a patron-artist relationship that you established. Yeah.
Right.
When I got back to New York, I'd put him in a cardboard. I'd cut a piece of cardboard in half and sandwich a watercolor in there and ride the subway. And he would give me a check, and I'd go down to the bank and cash it. Then I'd put it in my socks so I wouldn't get mugged. I'd put the $1,500 in there or whatever, and ride the subway sweating, thinking, I hope nobody takes this sharpened screwdriver out on me. And that was how we got started, Irving and I. Yeah.
And so this was a series of the small-scale birds?
They were, yeah, and
when
they were
you
inspired
started
by
out?
the travels in India, and he got a whole mess of them, yeah.
Which I still have and
He's
keep
got quite a few, right?
And really value. These watercolors that we're looking at here were made with you thinking about Larry's California Gallery.
Yeah, Larry and I met like about probably 5-6 years ago, and we somehow had not met yet. And the moment we met, he said, we've got to do something together. And so we finally figured out that we would do it here. And then I came out and visited, looked around the room, and I realized I got to do a show about California.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, when I visited this gallery the first time, there was the Ed Ruscha show up. So I was seeing a California show in the California gallery, and I was like, I got to do one. But the way I approach the work is, it's a natural history. Everything's through the natural history so I had to study up on the natural history of California.
Right.
And the cultural history of California. And I was particularly interested in the colonial period and how it informs what you've got now. So I just started doing a lot of reading. Everything that I get all my ideas from books. And
so the idea of Calafia is really almost an early creation myth of California?
Yeah, and it's not even a myth. It's California. The name California came from a 16th century novel. It was a chivalric novel. It's one of the nonsense novels that Don Quixote read and his friends threw on the fire because it was making him crazy. It's not a very good book. It's a silly book, actually. It's full of cliches. It's a silly book. But in the book, there are griffins flying around. There are huge female Amazonian warriors, black Amazonian warriors.
Whoa.
And it's a fantastically kind of, it's a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
And when and we know that Hernan Cortez read it, because he mentions it. And so when the conquistadors were sailing up the coast in the 1530s, and they saw California coastline, they just named it California after this imaginary land that they had read about in this novel. And that's where California comes from. And California was led, at the island in the book, was ruled over by a warrior queen called Calafia. Calafia ruled California. And so for the show, I was very interested in this idea of a griffin from California. So the paintings in the front show a griffin that could only have evolved in California. It's traditionally a medieval griffin is half eagle, half lion. But in my case, it's half California condor, half mountain lion. So it's a Californian convergent evolution version of a griffin. So it's like...
Can you, since you're on it, and on that subject, can you describe, say for example, that 3-panel painting?
Right, yeah.
Can you talk about it a bit?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So again, like I was reading about, so the quote up there is from a guy called Gaspar de Portola, and it's the first description of Los Angeles by a person from Europe. And what he says basically in a sort of colonial Spanish, if you read it, it's not like regular Spanish, but he says basically, we've traveled for 3 hours on a good road. On either side, there's much tar. We had a discussion amongst ourselves as whether this tar, which flows from the ground, molten, has something to do with these earthquakes. And I thought, it's already a little bit creepy, right? And it is weird. I mean, I'm from the East, so when I go to La Brea, I'm like, this looks like industrial pollution to me, but this is a natural phenomena that's been trapping animals in it and so anyone who knows about La Brea, so I had this idea that a sort of dream state, like nightmare vision of an Easterner's fear of what comes from the ground in California. So I have all the creatures that have been trapped over the millennia in the tar pits, rising out of the tar pits and spreading out across contemporary LA to attack. And so it's sort of like a bad Hollywood movie, I thought, like Sharknado or something. It's like a pitch, like, hey, what if? But it's also like an inner kind of nightmare of mine that the ground trembles and tar flows out of it, and we're not in Massachusetts anymore, kind of thing.
Right.
And
the animals are coming. They're coming up from the city. They're coming towards us.
Yeah, they're coming out.
They're very menacing, especially.
They're going to get Benedict Toshin up in the chemosphere.
Well, and that's also you have to.
He's up there having lunch.
He's up there with me, probably.
It's an extra little detail that you add in there that really gives this almost creepy feeling to it.
Well, I want real specific. So what we're doing in that painting is I'm sort of setting the tone for the whole show, which is this sweeping kind of history of LA from prehistoric times all the way up till now.
Whoa.
And
that's a big bite.
And that's why it's a 30-foot painting.
Got it.
And it's very cinematic. I mean, the panoramic format, it really is very cinematic. And
it's meant to be. And yet it's done in watercolor on paper, which would have been a sort of natural history artist's way of recording. The date on it is 1769, and maybe 1769, a natural history artist would take watercolor on paper and maybe write notes on it. But now we've done it 30 feet by 5 feet, and we're making this epic sweeping scene, and it's no longer a natural history watercolor. It's this sort of like hypnagogic nightmare.
Walter, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have written here, it's clear that no contemporary artist has employed natural history to tell the kind of stories that Walton tells. No one else, to my knowledge, has ever done watercolors of this size, scale, and ambition. Walton has taken certain ideas of John James Audubon and greatly extended and enlarged and altered them. Can you speak about Audubon?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first, let's see, having Southern parents, there was like hunting and fishing in the family, you know. We would go on trips, camping, hunting and fishing, and you have these sort of heroes of the gun room, you know, which is like, how do you decorate those things? So I grew up like at my uncle's house in Hopewell, Virginia. We would go duck hunting, and there were pictures. There were Audubon prints on the wall. He had money, we didn't in my family. So he had like Audubons, and I used to look at them, you know, and think, oh my God. So then I had the book, I pored over the book, and then I would do my own versions of those even when I was young. And so when I was quite little, I was drawing natural history subjects. Then I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and what young art students do is they end up with contempt for what they're good at. That's kind of the job of the young art student. They go and whatever they go with these skills, they're like, that's bullshit, I want to be. So I was like, I want to be a filmmaker. But I was already drawing like at a really high level and painting these natural history scenes, but that felt like childhood shit that I had to put away, become a contemporary artist and work in film, you know? It's like William Wegman came to the school and I was like, oh, cool, you know? And it was, to find kind of your passion kind of back to like what got you started when you were 10 years old, what got you excited when you were a kid. I think that's often where really good art comes from, you know? And if you look at Picasso, like I'm sure when he was 5, he was drawing bulls. And when he was 90, he was drawing bulls.
Yeah, exactly.
So I found my way back to it, thank God. And actually people like you helped me because I would do these knockoff watercolors for pleasure in my studio. And those were the things that the collectors would come over, or like people would come and be drawn to those. And because they could see the joy that I was getting out of it, or whatever, or the play. Well, it's not joy, it's play.
Yeah, they were extraordinary.
Yeah, and they started out just seeming like an extraordinary project, and I realized, shit, I can tap into all this stuff I've been doing since I was 5 years old. And then you have a much richer
voyage
to work on. Yeah, it's better.
But Walton, I mean, at the time you were starting out, there was really this push away from figuration and narrative work too. So for you to be continuing on your trajectory for so long, that must have been, you really have to be in your own head, in your own place.
Yeah, so, you definitely do have to not get discouraged. And Irving would come over and be like, don't despair, at the top of his lungs, you know, and I'd be like, good, that's good, thank you. And I would feel better.
I had that on a t-shirt.
You had it on a t-shirt?
Well, and I can imagine hearing that from somebody like Irving.
It was good.
When you're starting out is really...
Say, as long as you keep doing these at this high level, it's going to be okay. And he would say that there's cycles of, because he'd seen it so many times, he said there's cycles of things, but he says you're never going to fit into a school. It's never going to be a tidal wave like pop or this or that. But he's like, you might end up like, I remember you telling me, it might end up being like the way Lucian Freud or the way Francis Bacon or these people that are off to the side, they're doing their own thing. Just keep making these things at high quality and it'll be okay. And I believed that myself, but it does help to hear it from.
I've got a good one for you. When does illustration become art?
When I do it. I don't care about those distinctions. I think that that's a very new thing that comes with mass production. But basically, the Sistine Chapel is an we're illustrating episodes of the Bible. And then all of the Renaissance is illustrating a pretty interesting book in the Bible. And so I'm like, well, I like Renaissance art, geez, you know? I mean, so I went
well, in Giotto, you always reference the
Assisi, when I was 20, I went into the Assisi Cathedral there, the Duomo, and I saw the Life of St. Francis by Giotto all the way around the room. And there wasn't a piece of contemporary art I'd ever seen that held a candle to this in my mind. I was so blown away, and I said, I want to do something like this. It's not a dead language. There has to be new stories to tell in this way. So it never concerned me. And it didn't concern Andy Warhol either. I mean, I think you can't let yourself be worried about distinctions like that. So it has been called illustration.
I must tell you that I went to see Andy in the middle 60s, and he said, I'm making movies. And I said, great. And he said, I've just finished a movie. He said, do you want to see it? And I said, yeah, I really want to see. He put me in a little viewing room with several chairs. I was alone. And the movie came on. It was called Kiss. Two people kissing, boy and a girl, kissing. And I look, no movement. No movement. Two people kissing, no movement. And finally, when I thought, there's something going on that I don't really understand, the man blinked. And I could see there was movement. And I walked out of the room, and I said to Andy, brilliant, absolutely wonderful. And he took my arm, and he said, Irving, he said, you could be a film critic. But all the artists in the 60s particularly were provoked by film.
Right.
And had that as an ambition
Yeah.
to a degree.
Yeah, and I studied it at RISD, but I wasn't any good at it.
Remember his movies? Bruce Carter?
I don't remember Bruce's films.
Well, I mean, film is just one of the areas that really strives, really feeds your work. And I think, you get this sense of
this is like King
storyboards
Kong
and
back
comics and all this kind of popular culture and the stories. And so maybe you can talk about
like that
La
one has a
Madre.
King Kong feel. This is the painting about the California grizzly bear, and I was thinking of a Hollywood idea where you might have an animal grow to a prodigious size, like a bizarre, for no reason except that it's written into the screenplay. And so I like that idea. And so I did. It is the format for old black and white films like King Kong. It's a 3x4 format here. It's a sort of big projection screen basically with this animal
you have
on it.
anamorphic there.
So yeah, exactly. So there are references to film in the show in that way. They're just sort of there. And but this is an old story. It's the California grizzly was hunted to extinction, and the vaqueros, the first kind of pioneers here were experts at throwing rawhide lariats, and they would rope the grizzly bears.
Like lasso them.
Lasso them and pull them apart or drag them into a arena and put them with bulls or, do whatever they wanted as a blood sport. And so that idea of sort of torturing these bears, I wanted to make a sort of vengeful female bear. That's why it's called La Madre. She comes out of her cave to wreak havoc on these guys, but
and she's chained here. But
well, she's got some broken.
She's breaking out.
She's broken. She's like Moby Dick. She's been roped a million times, but nobody could capture her because she's too big. She's just broken all that. So it's this sort of ghost figure of the sort. It's the California flag grizzly bear coming back to get us.
I remember early on you did a series of oil paintings, and then you stopped doing them.
Yeah.
And I wondered.
Yeah, oil.
About them.
This is the natural history, like I was saying before, the language of natural history artists watercolor on paper.
Yes.
And often, and then they would take these watercolors to print shops and often have engravings or lithographs made and then bound them in books, and they would sell the books. So the sort of 19th century practice of natural history art was on paper. So these are the largest sort of works on paper of this type. I'm making them in the style of natural history artists. But I decided to take what would have been in a notebook and would have been a small fact.
And use that kind of
use
scale.
Epic scale to, take the minutia and make it huge.
Really impressive.
Thank you.
Incredible.
I'm working, the method of working in watercolor, it's such an unforgiving medium.
Yeah, you're not allowed to make mistakes.
Right, just to explain for people a little bit is when you make the gesture of the paint on the paper, it's there.
Well, you can't get rid of it. Yeah, it soaks in a tiny bit. It's absorbent, somewhat a little bit absorbent, the paper that I use. So once it's there, it's there. It stained the paper. So you move forward, but so there's art forms like marble carving, same way. Like you can't put it back once you chip it away.
Or fresco.
There's things you move forward in time. Yeah, fresco, and then there's things like clay and oil paint. Those you can go back and forth.
It's a little more malleable.
Push and pull. You can make mistakes and you can wipe it out. You can overpaint it. You can do these things. With watercolors, very little of that. There's some small details, like say the gouache highlights on top. If I don't like them, I might be able to wipe away a few and repaint them. But rarely do you get away with that stuff. When you start trying to make corrections in watercolor, you lose all the freshness. So yeah, you have to just sort of launch into it. It has to. You're not allowed to make mistakes, but you know your jet pilot isn't allowed either.
Do you still visit the dioramas at the Museum of Natural History?
Well, yeah, like once a month.
I remember you.
Yeah, and I draw in front of them.
Yes.
I drew grizzly bears for this. They
Really?
have some beautiful bear exhibits up there.
In that way.
I want to get the hair growing the right way. There's things that happen. It's just like you know, there's like a cowlick here, and then it comes down here, and then it swoops around here, and then it comes around there. That's like for real, you know. That's actually on the bear.
Yeah.
I can't make it up, so I go to the museum and I do drawings. I'm interested in getting it right.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's fun.
So you don't have stuffed bears in the studio that
I
you're...
don't have too much of that. No.
Well, talk to us a little bit about your research methodology, because I know you really rely on books and material to kind of work through your ideas. And
Yeah. I like I said, I get a big stack of books about California when I did this one, and it starts with this novel in the 16th century, and then I don't know. I was reading. I have a book all about California grizzly bears. A couple of books that are just devoted to California grizzly bears. In that painting over there, the skeleton, there is an actual quote from the 1840s where a guy describes finding a skeleton that he says was completely articulated and was unscavenged by wolves and stuff, and was, he said, sitting like a dog waiting impatiently for his master. And this guy came across the skeleton. So I was just handed that painting. I didn't even have to think of it. It was in my research. So sometimes I come across a piece of factual information that feels like surrealism. You know, it's as weird as anything, and I just paint it. But it's a sort of way to... that was one sentence in a big book about California grizzly bears. I want to make an epic work about a sentence like that and do honor to this animal that died in this ravine with his head on his paws like that. You know, it's just a kind of beautiful thing to think about. So,
as a viewer, you can't help but be kind of taken by the empathy of these animals and really getting the sense of, you know, animals in the human imagination. It seems like it's almost like confronting the viewer, that you need to respond in a way that's...
That's nice. I hope so. That's cool.
The three-panel painting seems to point another direction for you.
Yeah, it is a little bit different than the other ones.
You feel that?
Yeah. It's more. It's definitely. In some ways, even though it's sort of gruesome, it's more playful, and it also taps into some really cheesy, tacky sources like Frank Frazetta and horror comics and underground comics and things that I liked when I was little, monster movies and things. So it's not as, you know, some of them have a sort of old world gun room feel, and then this one is definitely pointing me in more of a direction where I can pull some of the kitschy crap that I really liked as a kid growing up and put it in there.
Right.
And still kind of dress it up as traditional natural history art. It's getting, there's a lot more going on in the paintings now than there ever was before, I think.
I'm happy that you still have a lot more to do.
I think so. I hope so.
And Walton, can you tell us a little bit about the art for the MGM Lion painting?
Oh yeah,
because
so there's a line in the other room, and you know, I researched the MGM Lion. I looked into this situation. I mean, there was one that crashed in a plane. There was one that they were all raised on these lion ranches that were in LA. There was one called Goebel's Lion Farm that people used to visit, and the Lion Club used to have banquets there, and they would eat lion steaks. They would eat a butchered lion.
Incredible.
I mean, all of this crazy stuff, and I'm looking for an idea for a painting, and I really wasn't getting. Jane Mansfield's kid was attacked at the Goebel's Lion Farm, and like his head was bitten, and he was put in a hospital bed right before she died in a car crash. I'm like, is there a painting in that for me? I wasn't sure. I was like, I'm just trying, you know. And then I guess I saw the kid stays in the picture. And then I was thinking about, and then I saw some pictures of Melanie Griffith and her mom, Tippi Hendren, and they had pet lions in the swimming pool with them when they were all growing up. Really wacky LA shit. And so I just thought I was thinking of every time the technology changed, there was a silent film MGM Lion, there was a sound film MGM Lion. there was a color MGM Lion when it became that, and then widescreen. It would have to be reshot, and there'd be a new MGM Lion. So I thought of the retired MGM Lion by the pool, like he's like, yeah, it used to mean something. These fucking kids today think. So that was the impulse. It was like a sort of Robert Evans version of, just like he's telling the war stories about being an MGM Lion, what it used to be like. But then it got darker as I painted it, and there's like a smashed bottle, and there looks like there could have been some violence in the background. And now you look at it and you think, oh, it's about the sex scandals that are going on now. I don't know. It could be whatever the hell it is. I'm glad it has a life of its own now. It's sort of like you can read into that line.
You can take it in a lot of
But his
different
eyes
directions.
are kind of rolling into his head. He's not healthy anymore. I definitely wanted him to seem like he'd had better days. And the interesting thing is that species of lion they know was something called a Barbary lion, which is the North African lion, which is now extinct in the wild. There's a few genetic specimens kind of hanging on here and there in zoos, but it had a mane that went down its belly, and it was the lion that they were breeding here in LA at the Goebbels farm. It was this Barbary lion, and it was the exact same lion that the Romans used in the Colosseum.
Whoa.
So that's cool too. So everything about it is like, I'm like, I got it. This is so much fun to paint, But these people have been sitting long enough, don't you think? I feel sorry for them.
Well, Irving, did you have...
Shall we
gotta wrap up.
open it to questions? If anybody
Maybe we could take one.
is curious about something?
There you go, yeah.
Yeah.
Watercolor, why is because, like I said before, I really believe it's the language of natural history art. It is the way that people, since Durer's rabbit, like Durer painted a rabbit in 1515, he was like one of the first people to really look at an animal like that and paint it not from a medieval chapbook and not as a stylized thing, but from nature staring at it. And he painted it in watercolor with gouache highlights on a piece of vellum. Very similar technique. And I just thought this, and that language held until photography took over. So, you have people painting that way in the 19th century when they shoot a specimen, they lay it out, and they draw or paint it in this way. So I just thought, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I mean, it also just is fun, I love doing it, and nobody else can do it.
And also...
Yeah, that's a sheet of paper I fabricated I have them laminate watercolor paper onto an aluminum panel. So there's actually 3 separate sheets of paper on that, and you can find the seams. I shouldn't tell, but you can. If you get up there, you can see the seams.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
Yes?
Why don't you ever use bleach for texture or erasing with either a brush or a toothpick?
Yeah, I don't know. I just haven't gotten into that yet. I don't trust it. I'm a little weirded out.
Yeah, but there's still time.
Yeah, it's nasty too. It's like bleach. Everything I don't know. I haven't tried it yet. Yeah.
Hi, by the way, these are amazing.
Thank you.
But I'd love to know the process. The scale is incredible. But what is, you told us about your research, but not the process of doing each painting and how long it may take to do that.
Well, this one I did in less than a month because I was in a hurry to do it, but I don't recommend that. I really wanted to get it done so I'd have enough time to do that one. So it was like this kind of weird thing. But anyhow, I draw freehand on it. I come up with a little sketch, and then I draw freehand with a pencil on the big sheet or the big panel, and then I start a series of underpaintings. So she was underpainted in orange and very bright colors, yellows and oranges and blues and, vivid color, like blue under the rocks, orange under her, and then I just start to put darker and darker washes over, and I work from the back to the front, so I paint the landscape first, and then I paint things as we come forward. So there's technical things I have to think about, and if I get the order wrong, I'm screwed. So.
And is this a process that they did with Audubon?
This would have been a pretty traditional. I didn't make any of this shit up, no. And that's the thing. I'm not like a formally innovative artist.
Right.
I'm not coming up with anything that wasn't done better by Renaissance painters 500 years ago. But I have some stories to tell that haven't been told in this way before. That's what sets it apart.
Yeah.
Because technically there's some pretty sick stuff in this, I'm happy to say, but they the guild system isn't up and running anymore, if you really want to get blown away, you can go to the Met, you know?
I do.
Yeah, right? And I mean, Walton Ford's pretty good, but holy shit, look, it's easy to get, yeah?
I have two questions. First one, I just returned from a trip to Death Valley and the Owens Valley and those places. And you said that a lot of your references are these books, but did you spend a lot of time traveling in those spots as well? Because that's like looking forward. And another question is, this painting behind you really has the flavor of the early California landscape paintings. Did you spend much time looking at those as well?
Yeah, to both those things is yeah. I did travel around the state a lot over the years. I didn't actually specifically do it for this show, but I'd already had, since the 80s, kind of visiting friends who lived in LA. Because when I went to RISD, half my friends went to Los Angeles. Some of my friends were working for Pee-wee's Playhouse, and other guys were working for Tim Burton, doing like Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, cool. And so I'd go and visit these guys. I want to see what they're up to. And so I'd drive up and down the coast and see Big Sur, which is a big part of these paintings, is just having driven through Big Sur. And so yeah, I was able to do that. And I did look at some of the early landscape artists in California for sure, because I did want to let that inform some of these mountainscapes. Definitely are pretty ripped off from those guys. So there's a collage aspect to it, where I am sort of taking a lot of different sources and putting it together to make the painting.
Those are references to California too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want it to really feel like, yeah, exactly. I want there to be as many layers of reference as possible. Everything from Ed Ruscha to the 19th century guys, yeah.
And Walton, maybe for us to finish things up, are there any projects that you're working on now that you would like to share with us? Or I feel like after this, a film or a graphic novel or
cool?
something.
I mean, I do have some ideas, but man, this one really wiped me out. I'm tired. I'm taking a little time
Take a little
off.
break.
I really haven't done squats since I finished
Take
this
a
show.
day off.
I was sitting by the pool, yeah, relaxing.
Well, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
Thank you
for
all for
listening,
being here.
everybody.